November 2nd, 1942. Approximately 240 nautical miles northeast of Espiritu Santo in the South Pacific. Lieutenant Shigeru Itaya sat in the cramped cockpit of his Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter, his leather flight gloves gripping the control stick as he led his formation of 8 aircraft on a reconnaissance sweep toward the American-held airfield at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The morning sky stretched endlessly blue above him, the ocean below shimmering like hammered steel in the tropical sun. His radio receiver, set to monitor American frequencies, suddenly erupted with a strange pulsing sound. Sharp, metallic clicks, rhythmic and mechanical, unlike any radio transmission he had encountered in 3 years of naval aviation. The sound repeated in precise intervals, sweeping across frequencies with methodical precision. Through his headset, Itaya heard his wingman, Petty Officer Takeshi Mori, report the same phenomenon. Squadron leader, I am detecting unusual transmissions. They pulse like a heartbeat. What are these signals? Itaya had no answer. He checked his instruments, scanned the horizon for American aircraft, saw nothing. The mysterious pulses continued, growing stronger as his formation approached Guadalcanal. What Lieutenant Itaya could not know in that moment was that his Zero fighter and 7 companions were being tracked with precision from distances they believed impossible. American radar stations on Guadalcanal had detected his formation minutes earlier, painting clear returns on cathode ray tubes that showed exact range, bearing, and altitude. The radar operators, working in sweltering Quonset huts near Henderson Field, had vectored American F-4F Wildcat fighters toward the incoming Japanese formation, with confidence born from technology the Imperial Japanese Navy barely understood. Within 20 minutes, 6 of Itaya's 8 Zeros would be shot down by Wildcats that appeared as if summoned from empty sky. Itaya himself would survive only by abandoning his aircraft and parachuting into the ocean, where he would spend 11 hours in his life vest before rescue by a Japanese submarine. The interrogation that followed his recovery would mark the beginning of a profound psychological transformation within Japanese naval aviation. The transformation from confidence in superior training and equipment to the gradual recognition that American technological capabilities exceeded anything Japanese doctrine had anticipated. The mathematics of this technological asymmetry were already being written in the skies above the Pacific. Between 1942 and 1945, American radar-guided interceptions would account for an increasingly devastating percentage of Japanese aircraft losses. By 1944, Japanese pilots operating within range of American radar installations faced loss rates approaching 60% on combat missions, casualty figures that would have been inconceivable in the war's opening months. The disparity represented not just superior American electronics, but a fundamental difference in how two nations approached technological warfare, industrial production, and the integration of new systems into combat operations. While Japan possessed radar technology and understood its theoretical principles, America had deployed radar systems in quantities and configurations that created an invisible detection grid across thousands of miles of ocean and sky. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. While Japanese engineers struggled with limited production capacity and copper shortages that restricted radar manufacturing, American factories were producing radar sets by the thousands, equipping everything from battleships to patrol torpedo boats with detection capabilities Japanese forces encountered with increasing frequency and mounting dread. The transformation would unfold not through a single dramatic revelation, but through thousands of encounters where Japanese pilots gradually understood they were being seen by forces they couldn't detect, tracked by technologies they couldn't counter, and systematically intercepted by an industrial and scientific apparatus of incomprehensible sophistication. Commander Minoru Genda, Chief Aviation Staff Officer of the 1st Air Fleet and principal architect of the Pearl Harbor attack plan, would later tell American interrogators in October 1945 that the moment he understood Japan had lost the war came from analyzing combat loss reports throughout 1944. The pattern was unmistakable. Japanese aircraft approaching American positions were being intercepted with impossible consistency. American fighters appeared at precisely the correct altitude and bearing to engage Japanese formations before they reached their targets. The explanation could not be superior. American piloting alone. Something was seeing Japanese aircraft from distances that violated every assumption about visual detection and radio direction, finding that Japanese doctrine accepted as fundamental limits. For thousands of Japanese pilots, the realization came through direct, terrifying encounters with American radar-directed interception. Encounters that left survivors shocked and demoralized by technology they had believed Japan possessed in equal measure to its enemies. The story of how Japanese pilots came to understand American radar superiority is not one of dramatic technological espionage or captured equipment revealing secrets. It is a story of cumulative revelation, of gradual understanding, of technological shock so profound that it transformed confident warriors into men who knew their missions were suicide long before their nation officially acknowledged defeat. The Imperial Japanese Navy that entered World War II in December 1941 possessed sophisticated understanding of radar principles. Japanese scientists had been researching radio detection technology since the mid-1930s. The Naval Technical Research Institute in Tokyo had developed functional radar prototypes by 1936, earlier than many Western powers. By 1941, Japan had deployed several radar types for specific applications. The Type 21 air search radar, operating at 3 meters wavelength, equipped some Japanese warships by the time of Pearl Harbor. It could detect aircraft at ranges approaching 80 kilometers under optimal conditions, performance comparable to early American and British naval radar. The Type 22 surface search radar, introduced in 1942, provided Japanese ships with nighttime detection capabilities against surface targets. Shore-based radar installations guarded critical facilities, including experimental stations that monitored approaching aircraft. Japanese radar technology was real, functional, and in some aspects quite advanced. The problem was never Japanese understanding of radar physics or inability to design effective systems. The problem was production capacity, strategic priority, and doctrinal integration. Japan's industrial base, stretched desperately thin, supporting naval construction, aircraft production, and ground force equipment, could not manufacture radar sets in quantities approaching American output. Copper, essential for radar transmitters and antennas, became increasingly scarce as the war progressed, and Japan's access to raw material sources contracted. Quality control in electronics manufacturing, requiring precision component fabrication and careful assembly, suffered as experienced technicians were drafted for military service and replaced by less skilled workers. More critically, Japanese military doctrine had not fully embraced radar as a war-winning technology requiring maximum priority. Traditional emphasis on superior training, fighting spirit, and optical superiority in aircraft design meant radar development received resources only after more established programs were funded. The Japanese Army and Navy, rivals competing for limited industrial capacity, duplicated radar research efforts rather than coordinating development, further fragmenting already inadequate resources. Commander Itaya, rescued from the ocean after his November 1942 encounter near Guadalcanal, spent 3 days aboard the submarine I-26, returning to Rabaul. His debriefing by intelligence officers focused primarily on American fighter tactics and Henderson Field's defensive strength. But Itaya kept returning to the mysterious radio pulses he had detected, pulses that seemed connected somehow to the impossibly accurate American interception. The Americans knew we were coming, he insisted in his written report, discovered decades later in Japanese naval archives at the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo. Their fighters were positioned perfectly, altitude and heading calculated to intercept us before we reached the target. This was not chance. They possessed some method of detecting our formation from distances exceeding visual range. The radio pulses I heard may have been related to this detection method. I recommend immediate investigation of American radar capabilities, which may exceed our own assessments. The report was filed and forwarded through intelligence channels. It was not the first such report, nor would it be the last. Throughout late 1942 and early 1943, similar accounts accumulated from Japanese pilots who survived missions against American positions. The pattern was consistent and disturbing. American fighters appeared with uncanny precision. American anti-aircraft batteries opened fire before Japanese aircraft came within visual range. American ships evaded night torpedo attacks despite darkness that should have concealed Japanese approach. Pointed toward detection capabilities Japanese intelligence had underestimated severely. The first comprehensive Japanese assessment of American radar came from an unexpected source. On April 18, 1943, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet and architect of Japan's naval strategy, departed Rabaul aboard a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber for an inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands. His itinerary, transmitted in encrypted naval code, detailed precise departure times, flight routes, and arrival schedules. American codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor decrypted these messages within hours. The intelligence was forwarded to Admiral Chester Nimitz, who authorized Operation Vengeance, a long-range interception mission to shoot down Yamamoto's aircraft. 18P-38. Lightning fighters from the 339th Fighter Squadron launched from Henderson Field on the morning of April 18th, flying 430 miles at wave-top altitude to avoid Japanese radar detection. The Lightnings, guided by precise navigation calculations based on Yamamoto's transmitted schedule, arrived over Bougainville at exactly the moment Yamamoto's 2 Betty bombers and 6 Zero escorts appeared. The interception was executed with surgical precision. Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr.'s Lightning fired a burst that sent Yamamoto's bomber crashing into the jungle. The admiral died instantly, his body recovered by Japanese search parties the following day. The loss devastated Japanese naval morale, but equally significant was the manner of interception. Japanese naval intelligence, analyzing the attack, understood immediately that American forces had possessed perfect knowledge of Yamamoto's schedule, flight path, and timing. The only possible explanation was code breaking, combined with long-range detection capabilities that allowed American fighters to navigate hundreds of miles over open ocean and arrive at a precise intercept point within seconds of the predicted time. The implications were staggering and largely suppressed by Japanese high command to avoid further morale damage. If American forces could read Japanese naval codes and possessed navigational systems, allowing such precision interception, then Japanese operational security was fundamentally compromised. Lieutenant Takeo Tanimizu, one of the Zero pilots escorting Yamamoto who survived the engagement, provided detailed testimony during his debriefing that revealed the psychological impact. The American fighters appeared from nowhere, he stated in a combat report filed on April 22, 1943, preserved in Japanese military archives. We had no warning. They attacked from optimal position with perfect coordination. This was not chance encounter. The Americans knew exactly when and where we would be. They planned this ambush with information we believed was secure. If they can do this to the Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, they can do this to any of... We are operating in an environment where the enemy knows our plans before we execute them. The psychological burden of this realization spread through Japanese naval aviation during 1943 as combat intensified around the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and the Central Pacific. Japanese pilots, already facing numerical inferiority as American aircraft production overwhelmed Japanese manufacturing capacity, now operated with the additional stress of knowing American radar could detect them at distances Japanese technology could not match. The tactical impact was immediate and devastating. Japanese formations approaching American positions were consistently intercepted before reaching their targets. Strike packages carefully planned to achieve surprise found American fighters waiting at altitude. Night attacks, previously conducted with reasonable expectation of avoiding detection, increasingly encountered prepared defenses that suggested American forces possessed night time detection capabilities far superior to Japanese systems. Captain Masatake Okumiya, a staff officer with the 11th Air Fleet and later a prominent post-war aviation historian, documented the deteriorating situation in his personal diary, entries that would be published decades later in his memoir, Zero, The Story of Japan's Air War in the Pacific. In June 1943, he wrote about analyzing loss statistics from recent operations around New Georgia. Our strike forces are being intercepted with disturbing consistency. Mission after mission, American fighters appear at precisely the altitude and bearing to engage us most effectively. Intelligence reports suggest American radar installations on Guadalcanal and New Georgia can detect aircraft at ranges approaching 100 miles. If accurate, this represents capabilities we cannot match. Our pilots are being sent against an enemy who sees them coming from distances that exceed our detection range by factors of 2 or 3. The radar installations Okumiya referenced were SCR-270 and SCR-527 early warning radar sets, massive systems deployed across American-held islands throughout the Pacific. The SCR-270, the same type that had detected the incoming Japanese strike on Pearl Harbor but whose warning had been ignored, operated at 106 MHz and could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 130 miles under optimal conditions. The SCR-527, an improved version with better resolution and reliability, entered service in 1943 and became standard equipment at forward air bases. These systems, manufactured by Western Electric and other American contractors in quantities that shocked Japanese intelligence officers, who eventually learned the production figures, created an invisible detection grid that Japanese aircraft could not penetrate undetected. Each radar station required approximately 70,000 pounds of equipment, including the transmitter unit, receiver console, power generators, and the distinctive bed-spring antenna array that gave the SCR-270 its characteristic appearance. The logistics of transporting this equipment to remote Pacific islands, assembling it under combat conditions, and maintaining it in tropical environments that destroyed electronics with heat and humidity represented an industrial and organizational achievement that Japanese forces could not replicate. While America deployed dozens of these radar sets across the Pacific, establishing overlapping coverage that made surprise attack increasingly impossible, Japan struggled to produce even limited numbers of radar systems for critical installations. The disparity was not subtle. By mid-1943, American forces possessed radar coverage across nearly every significant base and fleet concentration in the Pacific theater. Japanese radar deployment remained limited to a handful of major installations and selected warships, creating vast gaps in detection coverage that American forces exploited repeatedly. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, a radar specialist with the Japanese Naval Air Technical Arsenal at Yokosuka, understood the magnitude of Japan's technological and industrial disadvantage. In a technical report filed in August 1943, declassified by Japanese authorities in the 1980s, he provided a brutally honest assessment. American radar production exceeds ours by factors I estimate at 20 to 1 or greater, he wrote. Every American base appears equipped with long-range air search radar. Their ships, even destroyers, carry radar sets. Their night fighters possess airborne interception radar that allows them to detect our aircraft in complete darkness. We cannot match this deployment rate. Our industrial capacity, even operating at maximum efficiency, cannot produce radar sets approaching American quantities. We are fighting an invisible war where the enemy possesses total visibility and we remain effectively blind beyond optical range. Nakajima's assessment was not defeatist exaggeration, but accurate analysis based on intelligence reports, captured equipment examination, and production capacity calculations. American radar manufacturing by 1943 had become a massive industrial program, engaging dozens of contractors and hundreds of subcontractors. Western Electric alone produced thousands of radar sets. General Electric, RCA, Philco, and other electronics manufacturers devoted significant capacity to radar production. The MIT Radiation Laboratory, established in 1940 specifically to advance radar technology, employed over 4,000 scientists and engineers. By 1943, generating innovations faster than Japanese intelligence could track them. This industrial mobilization for radar development and production represented capabilities that Japan, with its limited industrial base and resource constraints, simply could not replicate. The technological gap manifested most dramatically in airborne radar systems that American night fighters used to hunt Japanese aircraft in darkness. The SCR-520 airborne interception radar, developed specifically for the P-61 Black Widow night fighter and later adapted for use in F-6F Hellcat night fighter variants, operated at 200 MHz and could detect bomber-sized targets at ranges approaching 5 miles. The radar operator, seated behind the pilot in the Black Widow's spacious fuselage, guided the pilot toward targets using range and bearing information displayed on a circular cathode ray tube. The system allowed American night fighters to locate, track, and intercept Japanese aircraft in complete darkness, capabilities that rendered Japanese night operations increasingly suicidal. Japanese pilots who encountered American night fighters equipped with airborne radar described the experience with language, suggesting incomprehension bordering on superstition. Ensign Kiyoshi Ito, flying a night intruder mission against American shipping near Bougainville in October 1943, survived an encounter with a P-61 Black Widow that he could not explain in conventional terms. His combat report, filed upon return to Rabaul, revealed profound psychological shock. "I was attacked from behind in total darkness by an aircraft I never saw until its tracer rounds passed my canopy," Ito wrote. "There was no moon, no searchlights, no flares, yet this American fighter positioned itself perfectly for a killing shot. Only my violent, evasive maneuver saved me." The American must have possessed some method of seeing in darkness that exceeds human vision. "I do not understand this technology, but I know that night flying against Americans has become more dangerous than daylight operations." Ito's experience was not isolated. Throughout late 1943 and into 1944, Japanese night operations suffered escalating losses as American night fighter squadrons equipped with airborne radar systematically eliminated Japanese aircraft that had previously operated with relative impunity under cover of darkness. The psychological impact on Japanese aircrews was devastating. Day operations meant facing overwhelming American numerical superiority and radar-directed interception. Night operations, previously offering some protection through darkness, now meant facing invisible American fighters that could detect and attack from any direction without warning. The cumulative effect created an operational environment where Japanese pilots understood their survival odds decreased with every mission. Captain Okumiya, analyzing casualty statistics in early 1944, calculated that Japanese naval pilots faced approximately 40% probability of death or serious injury per 100 hours of combat flying. This attrition rate, unsustainable by any military standard, meant experienced pilots were systematically eliminated, while replacement training programs could not provide adequate preparation due to fuel shortages and compressed training schedules. By mid-1944, the average Japanese naval pilot arriving at forward combat units possessed approximately 100 hours of flight training, compared to 400 to 500 hours for American pilots. This training disparity, combined with American technological advantages in radar and radio communication, created combat conditions where Japanese formations were outmatched both qualitatively and quantitatively. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 provided the most dramatic demonstration of American radar superiority's impact on combat outcomes. The battle, which American pilots would mockingly call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, saw Japanese naval aviation effectively destroyed in a single day of fighting. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the Japanese mobile fleet, launched approximately 430 aircraft in 4 massive strikes against American Task Force 58 on June 19, 1944. His plan relied on achieving surprise through coordinated attacks from multiple directions, overwhelming American defenses through sheer numbers. American radar made surprise impossible. Starting at 10 a.m., American radar operators aboard ships of Task Force 58 detected the first Japanese strike at a range exceeding 150 miles. Fighter direction officers aboard the carriers USS Lexington and USS Enterprise immediately began vectoring F-6F Hellcat fighters toward the incoming raids, providing precise range, bearing, altitude, and estimated size of each Japanese formation. The American fighters, guided by continuous radar updates transmitted via radio, positioned themselves perfectly to intercept the Japanese strikes before they reached the American fleet. What followed was systematic slaughter. The first Japanese strike, consisting of 69 aircraft, was intercepted by approximately 50 Hellcats at altitude 60 miles from Task Force 58. Within minutes, American pilots had shot down 42 Japanese aircraft. Of the 27 that penetrated to the American fleet, anti-aircraft fire destroyed 16 more. Only 11 aircraft from the first strike survived to return to their carriers, having achieved no hits on American ships. The second strike of 130 aircraft suffered similar devastation. American radar detected the formation at 11:30 a.m., vectored fighters to intercept, and watched as Japanese aircraft fell in scores. American Combat Air Patrol, precisely positioned through radar guidance, destroyed approximately 100 aircraft from this strike. The third and fourth strikes fared no better, with combined losses exceeding 50 aircraft to American fighters and anti-aircraft fire. By day's end, Japan had lost approximately 330 aircraft and 3 carriers sunk by American submarines. American losses totaled 29 aircraft, most to operational accidents rather than combat. The kill ratio of more than 10-1 was not attributable to superior American piloting alone. Though American pilots were generally better trained, the decisive factor was radar. American forces had detected every Japanese strike at ranges that allowed fighter direction officers to position defenses optimally. Japanese formations, operating without equivalent radar warning, flew directly into prepared American defenses that shredded them with mechanical efficiency. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, one of the few Japanese pilots to survive the battle, described the experience in testimony given to American interrogators after his capture in August 1944. His account, preserved in U.S. Naval intelligence records, revealed the psychological devastation the battle inflicted on survivors. "We believed our coordinated strikes would overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers," Abe stated. Instead, American fighters were waiting for us at altitude, perfectly positioned. They knew exactly where we were, how many aircraft we had, and what altitude we were flying. Their anti-aircraft fire began before we came within range of their ships. We were being tracked, coordinated against, destroyed systematically by an enemy who saw us coming from distances we thought impossible. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The Battle of the Philippine Sea broke Japanese naval aviation irreparably. The loss of over 300 aircraft, and more critically, hundreds of experienced pilots and aircrew, meant Japan could no longer contest American air superiority at sea. Subsequent naval operations would be conducted with the understanding that Japanese aircraft were unlikely to survive encounters with radar-directed American defenses. This psychological transformation from confidence to despair marked a turning point in the Pacific War, as significant as any battlefield defeat. For Japanese pilots who understood the technological implications, the battle confirmed what many had suspected since 1943. Japan was fighting an enemy whose industrial capacity and technological sophistication exceeded anything Japanese planners had anticipated. The radar systems that had orchestrated the destruction of Japanese naval aviation represented capabilities that Japan could not match, even if the war continued for years. The technological revelations continued to accumulate throughout 1944, as Japanese forces encountered American radar in increasingly sophisticated applications. The liberation of the Philippines brought Japanese pilots into contact with American radar installations of unprecedented density and capability. Every major American base in the Philippines featured multiple radar sets providing overlapping coverage. Mobile radar units accompanied American ground forces, providing tactical air defense that Japanese pilots found impossible to evade. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most accomplished fighter aces with 64 confirmed victories, flew combat missions over the Philippines in October and November 1944. His post-war memoir, Samurai, published in 1957, provided detailed accounts of encountering American radar-directed defenses. Sakai described the experience of leading a strike against American shipping in Leyte Gulf, only to find American fighters waiting at precisely the correct altitude and bearing to intercept his formation before it reached the target area. "We were detected at distances I estimated at 80 to 100 kilometers, Sakai wrote. American fighters, vectored by their radar controllers, climbed to meet us with perfect positioning. They knew our altitude, our heading, our formation strength. We had no equivalent warning of their approach. The tactical advantage was entirely theirs. We fought desperately, but against such technological superiority, courage alone was insufficient." Sakai survived the war, but most of his squadron mates did not. By December 1944, Japanese naval aviation units in the Philippines had been reduced to fractions of their original strength, losses attributable as much to radar-directed interception as to American numerical superiority. The systematic destruction of Japanese air power in the Philippines demonstrated that American radar had evolved from useful tool to war-winning capability that Japanese forces could not counter. The kamikaze operations that began in October 1944 represented, in part, recognition that conventional attacks against radar-directed American defenses were suicidal without hope of success. If Japanese pilots were going to die, better to die in deliberate suicide attacks that at least guaranteed hitting something rather than being shot down short of their targets by American fighters guided to interception by radar. The grim logic reflected complete collapse of Japanese confidence in their ability to compete technologically with American forces. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, senior staff officer of the 1st Air Fleet and one of the principal architects of kamikaze doctrine, later explained the decision in testimony to American occupation authorities. "We understood by late 1944 that our pilots could not survive conventional attacks against American radar defenses," he stated in a deposition filed in December 1945. "American radar detected our formations at great distances. Their fighters intercepted us before we reached targets. Their anti-aircraft fire, directed by radar, was devastatingly accurate. Suicide attacks offered our only possibility of inflicting damage. At least the suicide pilot who reached his target would accomplish something, whereas conventional attacks were being stopped short of targets by American technological superiority." The kamikaze campaign, which would claim approximately 5,000 Japanese pilots between October 1944 and August 1945, thus represented the ultimate acknowledgement of technological defeat. Japan was sacrificing its remaining pilots in desperation attacks, because conventional operations had been rendered impossible by American radar capabilities. The tragedy was compounded by the reality that even kamikaze attacks faced systematic destruction by the same radar-directed defenses that had defeated conventional strikes. American Combat Air Patrol, vectored by radar to intercept incoming kamikaze formations at maximum range, shot down approximately 75% of suicide aircraft before they reached their targets. Of those that penetrated to the American fleet, radar-directed anti-aircraft fire claimed another substantial percentage. Only a small fraction of kamikaze aircraft actually struck American ships, and even fewer inflicted serious damage. The terrible mathematics of kamikaze operations, 5,000 pilots killed to sink approximately 50 American ships and damage 300 others, demonstrated that American radar had made even suicide attacks marginally effective at prohibitive cost. The psychological burden on Japanese pilots ordered to conduct kamikaze missions, knowing American radar made success unlikely, was crushing. Ensign Teruo Yamaguchi, a kamikaze pilot who survived when his damaged aircraft forced him to abort his suicide mission in April 1945, described his pre-mission thoughts in a diary discovered after the war. "I am ordered to crash my Zero into an American carrier," he wrote on April 5, 1945. "I understand this is suicide. I understand the Americans will probably shoot me down before I reach their ships. Their radar sees everything. Their fighters are everywhere. But orders are orders. I will try to honor my emperor and my family, though I believe my death will accomplish nothing. The war is already lost. American technology has defeated us." Yamaguchi's aircraft suffered engine failure 40 miles from his target, and he was forced to ditch in the ocean. Rescued by a Japanese submarine, he survived the war, and his diary entries provided historians with rare insight into the mentality of kamikaze pilots who understood the technological hopelessness of their missions. The despair evident in his writing reflected broader recognition within Japanese military aviation that the war was lost, that American technological superiority had created conditions where Japanese victory was impossible, regardless of sacrifice or determination. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By early 1945, American radar coverage extended across nearly the entire Pacific theater. Long-range early warning radar on islands from the Aleutians to the Marianas created an interlocking detection grid that made Japanese aircraft movements visible to American commanders within minutes of takeoff from Japanese bases. The SCR-584 automatic tracking radar, introduced in 1944 for anti-aircraft fire control, brought new levels of accuracy to American air defense. Operating at microwave frequencies around 3,000 MHz, the SCR-584 could track aircraft automatically, while simultaneously directing anti-aircraft guns to firing solutions of extraordinary precision. The system incorporated analog computers that calculated target motion and gun aiming corrections automatically, removing human error from the engagement sequence. Japanese aircraft approaching American positions equipped with SCR-584 radar faced anti-aircraft fire of lethality that previous generation systems could not achieve. Statistical analysis conducted after the war revealed that American anti-aircraft batteries equipped with SCR-584 radar achieved kill rates approximately 3 times higher than batteries using optical fire control or earlier radar systems. For Japanese pilots, this meant that even if they evaded American fighters, they still faced anti-aircraft fire guided by radar systems that tracked them with machine-like precision. The cumulative effect of American radar superiority manifested in casualty statistics that told a story of systematic annihilation. Between 1942 and 1945, Japanese naval aviation losses totaled approximately 40,000 pilots and aircrew killed, with thousands more wounded or permanently disabled. Aircraft losses exceeded 45,000, representing virtually every aircraft Japan produced during the war, plus pre-war inventory. By August 1945, Japanese naval aviation existed primarily on paper. Actual combat-capable units possessed perhaps 1,500 aircraft, many of them obsolete types or partially trained pilots who posed minimal threat to American forces. The destruction of Japanese air power was attributable to multiple factors: American numerical superiority, better pilot training, superior aircraft performance in later war models, effective logistics that kept American aircraft operational, while Japanese aircraft suffered maintenance failures. But underlying all these advantages was radar, the invisible technology that gave American forces information superiority that Japanese could never overcome. Every American advantage in combat was multiplied by radar's ability to detect threats early, vector forces to optimal positions, and coordinate defenses with precision that manual methods could not match. Commander Minoru Genda, reflecting on Japanese defeat in his post-war interrogation, identified radar as the single most decisive technological factor. American radar created an environment where Japanese aircraft could not achieve surprise, he explained to his American interrogators in November 1945. Surprise is essential in air combat. Without it, the defender always holds advantage. American radar eliminated our ability to achieve surprise. We were detected at great distances, tracked continuously, intercepted before reaching targets. This technological advantage, more than any other factor, determined the outcome of the air war in the Pacific. Genda's assessment was shared by virtually every surviving Japanese aviation officer who analyzed the war's technological dimensions. Captain Okumiya, in his post-war writings, emphasized that Japanese failure to match American radar development represented strategic error of catastrophic consequence. "We understood radar's potential," Okumiya wrote in 1951. "Our scientists had developed functional systems, but we failed to prioritize radar production with the urgency it deserved. We allocated resources to building more aircraft when we should have been building detection systems that would allow our existing aircraft to fight effectively." By the time we recognized this error, American industrial capacity had created such enormous radar advantage that we could never catch up. The industrial disparity in radar production was indeed staggering. American industry produced approximately 100,000 radar sets during World War II, ranging from massive early warning systems to compact airborne units. Japanese production totaled perhaps 5,000 radar sets across all types, with quality control problems that made many units unreliable. This 20-to-1 production advantage reflected broader industrial capacity differences that determined the war's outcome. But in radar technology, the gap was particularly consequential because radar magnified every other American advantage. Japanese technical intelligence, analyzing captured American radar equipment throughout the war, produced reports that documented Japanese technological inferiority with painful precision. A technical assessment of a captured SCR-584 radar, conducted at the Naval Technical Research Institute in Tokyo in March 1945, concluded that Japanese industry could not replicate the system's microwave magnetron, precision servo mechanisms, or analog computing elements with existing manufacturing capabilities. This radar represents integration of technologies that exceed our current production abilities, the report stated bluntly. The magnetron alone requires manufacturing precision we cannot achieve in quantity. The servo systems use components we lack materials to produce. The computing elements require vacuum tubes and circuits beyond our electronic industry's capacity. Even if we obtained complete plans for this radar, we could not manufacture it in meaningful quantities. American industrial and technological capabilities exceed ours by margins we cannot close during this war's duration. Such assessments, circulated through Japanese military technical channels in the war's final months, reinforced what combat experience had already taught Japanese pilots and aircrew. The technological war was lost. American radar superiority was absolute and irreversible, given Japan's industrial limitations and resource constraints. Fighting continued because national policy demanded it, but informed officers understood that continuation meant only additional casualties, without possibility of changing the war's outcome. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, the Philippine Sea survivor, who had been captured in August 1944, spent nearly a year in American custody observing U.S. military operations. His observations, recorded in debriefing reports after Japan's surrender, provided Japanese perspective on American technological superiority. "I was permitted to observe American radar operations at their base in the Marianas," Abe reported. "Every aircraft takeoff and landing was controlled by radar. Weather reconnaissance aircraft were guided through storms using radar. Search aircraft were vectored to targets using radar information. The integration of radar into every aspect of operations created capabilities we never approached." American forces operated with confidence born from technological superiority. They knew where enemy aircraft were. They could coordinate forces across hundreds of miles of ocean. They could fight at night, as effectively as daylight. This was decisive advantage that no amount of fighting spirit could overcome. Abe's observations reflected what many Japanese prisoners of war experienced when exposed to American military technology. The scale, sophistication, and reliability of American systems exceeded anything Japanese forces had deployed. More importantly, American forces used their technology with casual confidence that suggested they took such capabilities for granted. For Japanese observers, whose military experience had been shaped by equipment shortages, maintenance problems, and technological improvisation, this abundance and reliability represented industrial and organizational achievement beyond their previous comprehension. The end came in August 1945, with atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, followed by Soviet entry into the war. Japan's surrender on August 15th brought World War II to conclusion. But for Japanese aviation personnel, the technological lessons of defeat continued to resonate. As American occupation forces arrived in Japan and began cataloguing Japanese military capabilities, the extent of technological inferiority became fully apparent to Japanese officials who had not directly experienced combat operations. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who had commanded Japanese naval aviation forces in the Philippines and had been principal advocate of kamikaze operations, committed suicide on August 16, 1945, rather than witness occupation. His suicide note, discovered by American authorities, expressed despair not just at military defeat, but at recognition that Japan had challenged an industrial power whose capabilities exceeded what Japanese leadership had understood. "We sent our young men to die in battles we could not win," Onishi wrote. "We ordered them to attack enemies who possessed technological advantages we could not match. The responsibility for this tragedy rests with those of us who led them into unwinnable war. I cannot face the families of the pilots who died following orders I gave, knowing now that their deaths accomplished nothing." Onishi's suicide, and his note acknowledging technological and strategic failure, represented psychological breaking point that many Japanese military officers experienced in the war's aftermath. They had believed in Japanese superiority, in superior training and fighting spirit compensating for material disadvantages. Combat experience had systematically destroyed these beliefs, revealing that modern warfare was decided by industrial capacity and technological sophistication more than courage or tactical skill. For Japanese pilots who survived the war and witnessed American technological capabilities firsthand during occupation, the revelations were comprehensive and devastating. They were brought to American air bases in Japan and shown radar installations they had never seen. They examined SCR-584 automatic tracking radars and understood why American anti-aircraft fire had been so lethal. They studied SCR-720 airborne interception radars removed from P-61 night fighters and comprehended how American pilots had hunted them in darkness. They observed American aircraft maintenance facilities and understood why American operational readiness rates had exceeded Japanese rates by significant margins. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima, the radar specialist who had warned in 1943 about American production superiority, was assigned to work with American technical intelligence teams, cataloging Japanese radar development. His role required him to explain Japanese systems to American engineers, who examined them with professional interest but without intimidation. The Americans understood Japanese radar technology. They had encountered it, analyzed captured systems, and defeated it through superior production and integration rather than superior physics. Nakajima later wrote about the experience in a Technica paper published in 1952. "Working with American engineers, I understood that Japanese radar technology was not fundamentally inferior," he explained. "Our understanding of radio physics was sound. Our designs were functional. Our failure was industrial and organizational. We could not produce radar sets in quantities approaching American output. We did not integrate radar into operations as comprehensively as Americans did. We treated radar as specialized equipment for particular applications. Americans treated radar as fundamental capability that every unit should possess. This difference in approach, multiplied by industrial capacity differences, created the technological asymmetry that determined combat outcomes." The lessons learned by Japanese aviation personnel spread through post-war Japan as survivors returned home and shared their experiences. Many wrote memoirs describing their shock at American technological capabilities. Others gave lectures to Japanese. Self-Defense Force personnel in the 1950s about the importance of technological parity in modern warfare. The aviation veterans associations that formed emphasized understanding what had gone wrong, why Japan's air forces had achieved so little despite fighting courage and tactical skill. The conclusions were unanimous across virtually all veteran accounts. Technological inferiority, particularly in radar, had doomed Japanese aviation from the moment American radar deployment reached critical mass in 1943. No amount of courage, training, or tactical innovation could overcome the fundamental asymmetry in detection capabilities. American radar gave American forces information superiority that multiplied every other advantage they possessed. Japanese forces, operating without equivalent radar coverage, were fighting from positions of permanent disadvantage. The submariners, pilots, and naval officers who learned these lessons carried them into Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing industrial policy, technological development, and defense planning for decades. The economic transformation that rebuilt Japan in the 1950s and 1960s was partly informed by lessons learned during the war. Japanese industry focused on technological excellence, quality control, and competitive advantage, rather than attempting to compete through scale alone. The emphasis shifted from creating impressive individual achievements, like the super battleship Yamato or the I-400 submarines, to building integrated systems that worked reliably and could be produced efficiently. The Zero fighter had been magnificent aircraft in 1941, but by 1943, it was obsolete because Japanese industry could not produce improved versions at rates matching American aircraft development. Post-war Japan learned to emphasize continuous improvement and rapid adaptation rather than perfecting initial designs. Former Japanese military officers, including aviation veterans, took positions in emerging electronics companies and influenced their development. Sony, Toyota, Honda, and other companies that became global leaders learned from military failures during the war. They understood that technological superiority required not just innovative design but complete systems, reliable production, effective quality assurance, and continuous improvement responding to competitive pressure. The lessons of American radar superiority during the war shaped post-war Japanese industrial philosophy toward these priorities. The transformation was complete when Japan Air Self-Defense Force units began incorporating American radar technology in the 1950s and 1960s. Japanese pilots trained with American instructors, learned American tactics, used American radar systems, and operated aircraft designed with American assistance. The former enemies became allies, united by recognition that technological excellence and industrial capacity determined outcomes in modern warfare. For Japanese aviation personnel who had experienced the war, this transformation vindicated their post-war assessment. Japan needed to match American technological capabilities, not just admire or resent them from positions of inferiority. By the 1980s, Japan's electronics industry was among the world's finest, producing radar systems, avionics, and defense electronics that incorporated lessons learned through painful defeat. The aviators who had been hunted by American radar in the 1940s now worked in industries that built equivalent systems, having learned through defeat what victory had taught their former enemies. The circle was complete in ways that honored sacrifice, while acknowledging the technological realities that had determined the war's outcome. The story of Japanese pilots intercepting American radar signals and realizing they were being detected from 20 miles away is ultimately a story about technological change in warfare and its psychological impact on those who experience it from the losing side. Superior technology, deployed with industrial capacity and doctrinal integration, trumped courage, skill, and determination. Japanese pilots were not cowards. They were not incompetent. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces, possessing decisive advantages that combat experience revealed with crushing clarity. The psychological journey from confidence to recognition of technological defeat paralleled the experience of German radar operators, encountering Allied jamming and Japanese submariners, discovering American sonar capabilities. All three groups encountered technologies they couldn't explain initially, couldn't counter effectively, and eventually couldn't deny, despite desperate desire to believe otherwise. All three groups returned to their homelands after defeat, carrying lessons about technological competition that shaped post-war development and influenced reconstruction priorities. The sky that Japanese pilots once controlled through superior training and excellent aircraft became American domain through radar technology, deployed at industrial scale. Early warning radar detected Japanese formations at ranges exceeding 100 miles. Fighter direction officers vectored American interceptors to optimal positions using continuous radar updates. Airborne radar allowed American night fighters to hunt Japanese aircraft in complete darkness. Anti-aircraft radar guided defensive fire with mechanical precision. The transformation was complete by mid-1944, leaving Japanese pilots with no safe altitude, no safe time of day, no hope of achieving surprise against radar-directed defenses. When the kamikazes crashed into American ships in desperation attacks throughout 1945, having concluded that suicide offered the only possibility of damaging an enemy whose radar made conventional attacks impossible, the psychological defeat of Japanese aviation was complete. If American radar could detect and intercept aircraft so effectively that only suicide attacks offered any chance of success, then Japanese aviation superiority was finished. The sky belonged to those who controlled the technology to dominate it. Japanese pilots understood this lesson viscerally. They had been detected at impossible ranges, intercepted before reaching targets, hunted in darkness by aircraft they couldn't see. Those who survived carried knowledge that Japan's defeat was inevitable once American industrial and technological superiority manifested fully at scale. The sky was never truly Japan's after 1942. It had only taken time for American radar deployment to reach the density and sophistication that made Japanese operations suicidal, regardless of pilot skill or tactical innovation. American radar systems, from massive early warning sets to compact airborne units, had transformed air warfare in the Pacific. Japanese aviation, regardless of fighting spirit or tactical creativity, was operating in an environment where the enemy possessed decisive technological advantages that determined combat outcomes. The realization came gradually through accumulated encounters, close calls, and casualty reports that told the same story mission after mission. By 1945, it was universal among survivors. The sky belonged to the nation that built the technology to control it. America had won the air war not through superior piloting alone, though American pilots were generally well-trained, but through superior science, engineering, industrial capacity, and doctrinal integration of radar into every aspect of air operations. The legacy endures in modern air warfare, where radar remains fundamental to detection, tracking, fire control, and navigation. The technological revolution that shocked Japanese pilots in 1943 and 1944 continues evolving, with modern aircraft using active, electronically scanned array radars and other capabilities that would astound both American and Japanese forces from World War II. But the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Technological superiority, backed by industrial capacity, determines outcomes in modern warfare. Japanese pilots learned this lesson through defeat and death. They carried it into post-war reconstruction, where it influenced Japanese industrial development and defense planning for generations. The aircraft that once represented Japanese air superiority now rest as museum pieces or lie scattered across Pacific islands and ocean floors, monuments to courage rendered obsolete by superior technology. The crews who flew them learned lessons that shaped nations. Lessons about the importance of technological competition in determining which nations prosper and which fail. The story of Japanese pilots detecting American radar signals and realizing they were being tracked from 20 miles away stands as testament to technological change in warfare and its psychological impact on those who experience it. From confidence to recognition of defeat, from presumed superiority to acknowledgement of inferiority, the journey transformed not just individuals, but influenced nations. The The sky changed hands not through individual dogfights, though those occurred by the thousands, but through invisible electromagnetic waves that detected aircraft beyond visual range, guided interceptors to optimal positions, and coordinated defenses with scientific precision. Lieutenant Shigeru Itaya, who had detected mysterious radar pulses during his mission to Guadalcanal in November 1942 and survived being shot down to report them, lived until 1993. In interviews late in life, he reflected on that November morning when he first encountered American radar. "I heard strange pulses on my radio and wondered what they meant," he recalled in a 1987 interview preserved in President, Japanese War Memorial Archives. "Within minutes, American fighters appeared and shot down most of my squadron. I didn't understand the connection then. I thought perhaps it was coincidence or superior American reconnaissance. Only later, after many similar experiences and intelligence reports from other pilots, did I comprehend that those pulses were American radar, detecting us from distances we thought impossible. That was the moment, though I didn't realize it then, when I first encountered the technology that would defeat Japan. We were being seen by eyes we couldn't understand, tracked by systems we couldn't counter, hunted by an enemy who possessed capabilities we had underestimated completely." Itaya's reflection captured the essence of Japanese pilots' collective experience. They had entered the war confident in their superiority, believing training and spirit would triumph over material advantages. Combat experience systematically destroyed these beliefs, revealing that modern, technological warfare was decided by industrial capacity and scientific sophistication more than individual courage or tactical skill. The thousands of Japanese pilots who died during the war, including Itaya's squadron mates shot down near Guadalcanal in November 1942, were defeated by an industrial and technological system they couldn't comprehend until too late. Those who survived carried knowledge that shaped post-war Japan and influenced global aviation development for decades. The sky belonged to those who controlled the technology to master it. That lesson, learned painfully by Japanese pilots between 1942 and 1945, remains relevant in modern air warfare and technological competition between nations. The electromagnetic spectrum, invisible to human eyes but decisive in determining combat outcomes, had become the new high ground in warfare. The nation that dominated that spectrum dominated the battlefield, regardless of courage or determination displayed by forces operating without equivalent technological capabilities. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.